I really love that chapter from Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer that Elizabeth read so beautifully a few minutes ago. Even though my childhood was very different from the one that Kimmerer describes. In my family, there were no rituals of any kind, really, let alone rituals that helped me feel connected to the earth or to express gratitude. I grew up among the strip malls of Broward County, Florida, and there was precious little in my life as a child that ever made me feel something like a deep connection with the natural world. There were a couple of canoe trips on the Peace River, but when we went camping, there were no moments when my mother thanked the spirits of the river or anything like that. The first time I really remember feeling that kind of powerful connection to the earth around me was when I was in college, and I spent the summer on the island of Andros in Greece. My history professor had purchased 12 acres on the island and had just founded a nonprofit organization there. This was not long after the nations of Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia had collapsed and broken up, leaving thousands of children trapped in orphanages there who were politically stateless. The nations that formed after the breakups wouldn't give them citizenship because of their ethnicities or because of the burden of caring for them, so they were just stuck. They couldn't go anywhere, but nobody would take care of them. Everyone else said they were somebody else's problem. So this nonprofit was going to create a school on this piece of land in the Cyclades and smuggle as many of those children as possible there to raise and educate them. I was part of the first group to go work on preparing the grounds, so I spent the summer building terraced walls where olive trees would eventually grow, helping to build a cistern to catch and store rainwater, and other such manual labor. I had hoped to eventually be a teacher living there, and which never really came to fruition. But this was my first trip outside of the United States. It was almost the first time I'd ever been outside of the state of Florida. I had no idea what I was doing, and I spent basically every penny I had on the plane ticket to get there and back. This was pre-cell phone, pre-GPS. I had some handwritten instructions that involved like vaguely finding a way to some spot. It was kind of terrifying in a lot of ways. It was quite an adventure. I learned all kinds of valuable lessons on that trip. There was a tiny little house on the property with one bedroom, a bathroom that had running water, but water was very scarce, so we barely used it. There was a tiny little kitchen and living space, and then there was an ancient circular threshing floor outside. where grains were threshed and winnowed, surrounded on three sides by curving mountainsides cut into stepped terraces. When I arrived, my professor explained to me that in ancient times, they would bring sheaves of grain and toss them into the circle, and then lead donkeys dragging behind them a big, heavy wooden board, which would tear the ears of grain from the stalks and loosen the grain itself from the husks. The broken stalks and the grain would be caught up by the wind that swirled through the little canyon and would be lifted up and then scattered across the countryside, returning to the soil as fertilizer. He also described that this threshing floor, it made a natural amphitheater, because you had this sort of circle and then these curving olive terraces around it, and if you stood on the threshing floor, your voice carried really well to this little semicircle of seating. And so he sort of talked to me about how the earliest theater was people standing on these threshing floors talking to people gathered around them. And again, I had grown up in South Florida. The oldest human activity I knew of, the sort of my connection with the ancient, was when we went on field trips to the Vizcaya Museum in Miami, which was so ancient that it was built before there was air conditioning. I think it was built in the early 1900s, and that, to me, was so far beyond. Pretty much the oldest building I knew of, other than Vizcaya, was the McDonald's down the street. And now here I was, standing on this threshing floor, this hard circle of ground where people had worked and played, spoken, performed, literally for centuries. It was really profound. But what I really remember about that threshing floor were the stars. I tossed my sleeping bag on that threshing floor, and that's where I slept every night for 6 weeks while I was in Greece. The stars were like nothing I had ever seen in the light pollution of Florida. I, of course, knew that the Earth is spinning in the galaxy known as the Milky Way, but I had never understood that name until I saw the stars spilling across the sky like spilled milk. After a hard day of carting large rocks up the mountains or digging with a pickaxe and a shovel, I would lie there at night and just stare at the stars for what seemed like hours. I had seen a shooting star or two as a child, but under that night sky, the shooting stars were frequent and lasted long enough to really, you could sort of see a shooting star and follow it across the sky and point it out to somebody, and they had time to see it before it was gone, which I had no idea that such things existed. Lying there, staring into the stars and feeling the vastness of the universe, I felt as though I might fall into the vast universe and float away amongst those stars. And then I had the transcendent realization that I was floating away, that I had fallen into the universe, that I am part of this grand celestial dance of stars and planets and comets and nebulae and meteors. I may be riding on the back of this planet we call Earth, that is tied to the tail of Sol at the center of a string of planets as we whiz through the universe, but I am floating through the celestial sea that created me. I am at one with the universe. I wondered where in that vast ocean above me had been the star that exploded to make the dust that accumulated into this stellar system I call home and begat the elements that make up my being and course through my veins. It is the same stardust that we all share as we eat and breathe and drink, as we are born and as we die. I am a manifestation of the universe as much as the sun and the moon and the rest of the stars. As far away as they may seem, I can touch them all. I hold them in my hand. They are my hand. And we are all of the same stardust. However we want to divide ourselves up, nations, races, species, animate, inanimate, animal, vegetable, mineral, we're all the same. The connection is immutable. We have borrowed these bits of the universe to take shape in this way and at this time. I thought about those politically stateless children that I hoped my work would one day be serving, and how ridiculous it was that there were children wasting away without anyone to care for them because of some idea that national borders meant that they were not fully human. We will pass away, and our borrowed pieces will return to the universe to redistribute as chance will have. We have no say over that. The footprints we leave cannot be in sand or marble or air or water, but in the connection between all the things in the universe. And that includes you and me. The stars opened something inside me during those summer nights. It started with that cosmic transcendent experience, sort of like in Vivian Ryder's story earlier today. I felt a new light shining in the universe, and it made me fall in love with the earth in a way that I hadn't experienced before. But then when I had flown back to Florida and gone back to work and school under the streetlights and the neon signs instead of the light of the moon and the stars, I really wanted to hold on to that sense of wonder. I started to think about ways that I could be intentional in my practices and thoughts so that I could hold on to that feeling of connection with not only the earth, but with the universe. I started to construct little rituals for myself to try to remind myself of the way that I had felt that summer. I tried to make it a point to pay attention to the beauty that was available to me, even if it wasn't the overwhelming splendor of the Cyclades. I made up small ways to remind myself to be grateful for the natural world that surrounds us. And then, like Robin Wall Kimmerer, at some point I began to feel what I guess would be a version of an imposter complex about the whole thing. It sort of dawned on me that these homemade ceremonies I was performing were inadequate, that somehow, Robin Wall Kimmerer's words, somewhere there were people who knew the right ceremony, who knew the lost language and spoke the true names that I was not privy to. I'm not exactly certain when that feeling faded, that imposter complex feeling faded, but I suspect it had something to do with becoming a parent of two daughters myself. They grew up in a pretty urban area of Atlanta, but we frequently went out into the woods and camping, and sort of seeing their sense of wonder in the natural world reawakened that feeling for me, and finding communities that we could, or rituals that we could practice together when we were out in the natural world and when we were at home in our urban spaces that reminded us that we are part of an interconnected web of all existence, was a sort of deep and important part of parenting my daughters, who now are college age and traveling around the world themselves. My oldest daughter is in Amsterdam right now studying abroad, and I can see the power that has come in them of experiencing this sense of interconnectedness and of the big scope of the world around them. I don't have like a beautiful ending for this sermon, to be honest. This is it. We are interconnected. We are all star stuff, and we're fooling ourselves when we don't see it.